Hello and happy Saturday evening. I'm Victoria Weather meteorologist Ryan Henning, and we're going to be looking at St. George, Utah this evening. It's a pretty quiet night down there, and that's usually the case, but recently that hasn't really been the case. I've got the satellite up looking at the region. You can see there's still a few really bright tops, and that means they're higher tops, and in the plains that usually means they're a thunderstorm complex, but in the mountains you get higher tops just because there's higher elevation, and it doesn't have to go so high to have cold tops, which is the reflection is reflected on the model, and you can see weather puppy Mariah right in my lap here. But where I was going with that, there's an area low pressure that's currently in the plains producing severe weather, and the back end of it has been in the central Rockies for the last several days, producing snow and rain throughout Colorado, Utah. I posted recently about the mud that fell from the skies north of Salt Lake City. That is the same system. And it really didn't impact St. George quite as much. There was some dust in Las Vegas as well as the cold front moved through and brought some significant wind to the area. But it didn't really bring a whole lot of precip to the region. And you can kind of see that by looking at the latest observations. St. George is in the southwestern corner of Utah, and their temperature is 73, if you could see that. And all other sites in the region, Cedar City is in the 50s, and the site just off to their east is also in the 50s. It's 40 in Grand Canyon in Arizona, and that's partly due to two factors. It's due to the fact that St. George sits more in a valley, and the Grand Canyon in particular is in a elevated location, the rim of the canyon. And then also it's been cloudier and it's been pulling away more slowly, and it got much warmer today in St. George than it did in central Utah. So now that night's fallen and it's clear and it's going to start to radiate out, it's going to get colder where it's already colder, if that makes sense. They've got a lower ceiling that they're dropping from. So that's why St. George is already sitting at 73. One thing to note, though, is the dew point, which is only 19 degrees. So it's very dry in St. George right now. They're very close to the desert, so that doesn't really... I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It's not too terribly surprising. And that's going to be important as we go forward, but it is also indicative of the fact that they didn't see any precipitation as this system worked its way through the central Rockies. But we want to look at the models, and once again, that's not exactly where we want it, is it? Well, just found something to edit. All right, so we're back. So now that we're looking at the models, we can see the giant area of low pressure over the central Rockies and moving into the plains, and it's quieting out in the southern Great Basin, so Vegas, St. George in particular, and we can see mousing forward that the NAM on top brings back a little bit of precipitation going forward in the forecast, kind of at the back end of the system. And there is, I mean, obviously a clash in hot and cold air masses, which in the plains would often lead to some precipitation. But we also see that the dew point in St. George is around 19 degrees, and it's not much higher elsewhere. So there's not a lot of moisture to work with, and there's not a body of water that it's easy to pull moisture from to get to that part of the world. So if we look at the GFS and backtrack a little bit, well, now we're back on the NAM already. There we go. If you look at the GFS, you can see that there's no moisture in St. George, and I think that's what makes sense to me and will make sense in the forecast going forward. So the official forecast for St. George, Utah is going to be a couple of hot days at the back end of the systems with mostly sunny skies, a few afternoon clouds, but no precipitation whatsoever. So back to normal. They're very close to drought conditions as well. They're not used to a lot of rain even in a good year, and they're seeing even less, just like their neighbors to the west in Nevada and California. But a couple of dry days, despite what the NAM has is holding on hope for. But for this evening, I'm Victoria weather meteorologist Ryan Henning.